discussion. And you have a lot of time, given the small number. All questions or comments are welcome. We have to speak through the microphone for people who are streaming. Thank you.
Folks back home.
The folks back home.
Giving me stage fright.
Yeah, that's okay. We all get it all the time.
This might be a mundane question, but I was just wondering the visiting teacher, what they would be presenting. And I read a little bit online, but I can't confess to be educated on those topics. So I was just wondering if you might share in your own words what they might be presenting.
You. I'm going to give that to Bill since he came up with the composite, him and Dora. So between them, except where did Dora go? Well, Bill will begin, okay? The composite of the ideas of the teachers.
Yes, there's several pieces to it. One of them, the first evening, one of the themes, the general theme overall, has to do with working with adverse circumstances. And working with them in a way that it's not only that we somehow make them workable, sort of manage them, but that we actually begin to understand how adverse circumstances actually are you could say the basis of the path or critical to the path. They're not just an obstacle to get around. So that's an element of that frames all the things that we've asked for. The second teaching, the Saturday teaching on the four dharmas of Gampopa, which now you understand it completely, of course. Yeah.
From that title.
Next question. This is a very pithy summary of the path, and it begins with looking at how renunciation can arise and how that is a foundation in the path. And when we talk about renunciation, we're talking about basically about giving up our loyalty to our confusion. And that could be explained, and we hope it will be. But that's kind of the thrust of it, giving up our loyalty to our habitual patterns that cause harm for ourselves and others, giving up the basic confusion, loyalty to basic confusion. And it evolves from that. The way they're translated, sometimes it goes something like, bless me that my mind may turn towards the Dharma. So turning away from confusion and turning towards the Dharma. Sort of a shift, that transformational point where we actually begin to shift our direction and understand where real benefit lies. And then once we have shifted, we actually have to engage in activity. We actually have to take action so that what we do is not just admiring something, admiring a new direction, but it's actually, the Dharma becomes a path. It becomes a path of transformation. So we actually have to do things in order to let go of certain kinds of habits, cultivate other habits, engage in practices that allow us to see more clearly. That's one way you could talk about meditation. The third one, and that one is grant me the blessing that the Dharma become a path. The third one is grant me the blessing that the path may clarify confusion, so that I really invest in it deeply so that it actually becomes transformative, clarifies confusion. And the one that's really kind of challenging, it's kind of off the charts. So far we're kind of working along on a progression. The last one, grant me the blessing that confusion dawn as wisdom. It's like, whoa, what is that one? But this points points to a level of being settled in our meditation in a way where the awareness actually can penetrate the nature of experience, both the nature of what we take to be a self and an awareness, and the nature of all the appearances that arise. So even those appearances that are driven by confusion, even those become fuel for deeper insight. So it's a way of these teachings go into describing the path in this way. The 6 bardos. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Dora? Sure.
Oh, we're on the third part of your first question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he was,
Just so
he's
we
gone
get to
over
the
the
complete.
Friday evening teaching.
Yeah.
The Friday evening teaching
Sure.
was about transforming adversity. And then the Saturday day-long teaching about the 4 dharmas of Gampopa. And then all Sunday teaching is about the, it's a teaching that's given often in connection with learning about death and dying and the processes that are taught that we go through. And, but it's also, so it's called the 6 bardos. And bardo means kind of time in between or interval. And so actually there's bardos like of dreaming and you know, there's things during our lives, but so it's about life, but it's also about the interval between when we leave this body and between going to a new incarnation and that. So the theme is more about death and dying, but it'll be teaching on the 6 bardos. And I think that Rinpoche, we're asking him to also talk about, or along the way, to talk about how to prepare for death and how to help each other in the process of death and dying, that kind of thing. So, and then Tuesday evening is the empowerment of the practice of Green Tara, who's a bodhisattva of especially helping with like fear and danger and kind of a protection theme, and compassion, loving kindness, of course, as well. And also refuge will be given that evening. So anybody who wants to kind of formally enter the Buddhist path, there's the opportunity for refuge.
You wanted to follow up?
Maybe. I was wondering, from what Bill was describing, it sounded like didactic presentation that you could apply to your life. And I'm just curious if there would be an experiential aspect to go along with it in terms of a practice, like a meditation along that lines. If that, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then but then as
We're certainly asking for that,
yeah.
because it's always nice to have some pieces of guided meditation going along within teachings. It really depends on what Khenpo Rinpoche feels like doing that day, how much time he'll spend with that. But there is explanation, but particularly with the 4 dharmas of Gampopa, you're talking about aspects of practice. You're talking about kind of, these are stages of practice, not just philosophical divisions of things. So for some of them it's easier if we were going to go directly to, wow, I'd love to also have just the pointing out instructions that illuminated the fourth Dharma of Gampopa. And we'll just cut to the chase right there. Confusion dawns as wisdom. Why bother with the first three? That would be really nice. But that one, it's easier probably for him to introduce some contemplations and some little pieces of meditation with the other elements. But we're asking for that because sitting with him, meditating with him is actually really, it's an inspiring experience.
Sure.
And I would say that you're experiencing all the time. So when you come in the room and be with Khenpo Rinpoche, it has an experience. Everyone will have that. But some people have gotten it, so to speak, just from being in the presence of such a being, or taking an empowerment from such a enlightened being. So the experience depends on the teacher and the student equally. So we can be around. I mean, there's a funny story about a guy that was a taxi driver that was around the Dalai Lama and just listened, walked away, and said to this one author who was writing about it, "He's just not that bright, is he?" About the Dalai Lama. So that was that person's experience. So you know, I mean, it's more than probably at least half, but more than half us. What do we bring? Are we bringing an open mind and heart? Are we bringing a calm mind? Are we bringing a loving mind? You know, so, I mean, I just point that out. It can seem obvious, but sometimes we get very external, you know, like if I see that person or I hear that, it will happen. But then we don't do our practice daily, and we don't, as they say, one of the metaphors is we don't bring to the Dharma a clean cup, meaning metaphor for our mind, an open cup, one that's not. And for Westerners, I'm talking about myself, but I've seen this a lot. Our cup is filled up. We already know. So we'll come see someone and listen to some teaching, but really we already know. We know just about everything. So there's a certain pride that we have to watch for, because as Lama Michael often says, oh, we're so smart, we're so intelligent, we're so educated, and that can become an obstruction because of that cup full. No room for anything, really. So, yeah, and a cup without a hole in it, that's one of my favorite ones. It goes in and this goes out. I was there, but I can't remember even 3 things. So that part's our job, you know, bring that kind of mind.
The aspect that you mentioned, just the experience of being with somebody who's really steeped themselves in practice and steeped themselves in the Dharma, it's different, kind of no matter how you slice it. But it's also individual. There's the aspect of there's certain things that we can do to, as you mentioned, to enhance, kind of to tune our radio a little bit so that we're ready to listen. We've got the right frequency and we're paying attention. But there are also aspects where it's just highly individual.
Yeah, karma
Where,
functions.
Yeah, we don't. So
yeah.
It's kind of. I wouldn't want anybody to feel sort of like blamed or like, well, you didn't get it. Well, you obviously didn't do it right, because that.
Yeah, but we have work to do.
Yeah, but we can't actually arrive with a
and
good
these
outlook.
amazing stories we hear, you know, like a teacher slapped their student with a shoe, And the student was waked up. Well, that student probably had some lifetimes of hard work before that happened. Or Milarepa, we hear, how magnificent Milarepa was, and he was, but we don't hear all the things Marpa put him through. I mean, build that stone tower, take it down, build it again, take it down, till your back is bloody from carrying stones, keep going, having to train his mind to go through all that hardship. So then it comes, these things come from causes and conditions, and we're a big, huge part of that. Yeah.
I had an experience to add to that with Khenpo Rinpoche in particular, but talking about being in front of somebody who's practiced a lot and what happens in that moment. There's a lot of questions that sometimes we carry with us, and when you're in front of somebody who knows the answer to that question, something strange happens where you don't have the question anymore. Where just you're in front of somebody who knows and you don't feel the need to ask that question. But the practice for me when I saw him last time was I had a question that was really burning for me a lot. And I didn't get a chance to ask it, but I tried just sitting with that question and kind of trying to dedicate that somebody else would have the answer. And that burning went away and other people had their questions answered, and out of that came a lot of better things than the question that I had actually being answered. So in that way there's practice to be had even when you don't get your question answered.
That's a nice example, Ryan, of that mind that lets go of, I gotta have it this way. And you saw it and worked with it. Nice.
Somebody else can have their question.
Yeah, nice. And then you got, so many times, it's really true that when we loosen our grip on something, we get what we needed. And we thought it was A, and what we actually needed was elemental, And it's wow, I see that my grip on it was what was in the way. Yeah. So just recognizing that burning, that's watching the desire. And we have all these songs and everything burning with desire. Our actual common language is so spot on sometimes, So, yeah.
My experience was when I was at retreat with Khenpo, and the first couple of days I was really overwhelmed with all the information that was coming and all the Tibetan that was being spoken, and what am I supposed to be thinking right now, and how am I going to assimilate this? And I was just and at one point I was talking to our friend Sanjay, who's usually here Sunday evenings, and I was telling him I don't even think I should be here. It just feels like this is just, I feel like I'm wasting people's time being here, and Sanjay just kind of chuckled, and it was oh, I've heard all these teachings several times, and you just listen and take it in, and you just take in what you can, and you just sort of let it soak in, and some of it slips away and some of it hits the spot, and I really after talking to him, I was really able to just sort of relax and enjoy the rest of the time there.
Yeah, you bring that nice clean cup of your mind, and you just relax. You're not trying to get anything. as soon as we're trying to get, we can even bring all the kleshas to the Dharma, and be the klesha of desire and aversion. I love that part, I hate that part, I don't care about that part. And there we are. Just something else to work with, really. I kind of want to come back to this part when Bill described this transforming adversity into what?
Confusion dawn as wisdom.
Confusion, yeah. Adversity, confusion, dawning as wisdom. And I think you can think of times in your own life where you experience that. Yeah, I'll just, my go-to example when I can't think of anything else was when I got diagnosed with breast cancer. Huge fear, anxiety, confusion. Am I going to die from this? I'm only 59. On and on and on. And so you go through that, and it just dawns as such a learning about facing death, how you're going to do it, how you're going to deal with your family, dealing with fear, dealing with physical discomfort over a period of years, a couple years because of the chemo and such. So I just came out of that, like so many survivors, saying, I am really glad I had that experience. If someone said to me, could you pull that out? I'd say, no, absolutely not. So I'm sure there are things in your own lives, like ruined relationships or physical things, where you already you have experienced this, right? Something really difficult turns into this clarity about purpose, values, etc. Deaths of family members, things like that. So that's what that is about on a certain level. I'm sorry, I've got asthma and allergies on top of each other, and that's why I'm coughing like that, don't worry. Tree pollen.
Another dimension of the confusion dawns as wisdom is much more immediate, on the spot. It's not this happens and then I process it and then I have some kind of transformed relationship, which is one way that you could talk about it. But the direct experience of in the moment as a habit pattern arises, as the energy rises, that the nature is seen and liberated on the spot, which is.
Say more.
What's that?
Say more.
Say more?
Yeah. Because it's so important to have both of those levels.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking using the conventional,
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's.
This is something that applies mainly to the categories that we label either Dzogchen or Mahamudra, which in themselves the labels won't help. But they're the practices of looking, having cultivated the stability of mind, so that it's possible to look into both the nature of awareness and the nature of all appearances that arise in the space of awareness. That having seen the nature of both the appearances and the awareness, there's nothing sticky about what arises. We don't have I must get rid of it because it's unpleasant, or I must hold on to it because it's pleasant, or I'm just ignoring it. The experience is liberated on the spot.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
That does help in clarifying. I think about it like skiing, so when you're basically falling down a hill, so you're developing skill as you fall. You know, so it's like slipping, and by virtue of slipping, you create the energy needed to develop flow. You know, the idea of flow, where an artist is kind of gliding through an experience and surfing that. I kind of think about the mind's energy as like the velocity of going down a slope or something like that, where you could call it falling, but it's not really falling. There's skill involved.
Well, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to try too hard with it, but one thing I would add from what I know, it would be like that falling with no judgment in any moment of it. Like, oh my God, I have to do this, or this is great, or, you know, just seeing those rise and fall and rise and go away, you know, by their very nature. I suppose it's like falling by its very nature is totally impermanent, because when you're falling, you get it that we're constantly doing this. When we sit here, that's also happening. Like Pat doesn't look like he's changing at all, right? But he is. Everything about him is falling right now.
Yeah. Well, you don't think about the snowflakes when you're going down the hill, right?
Snowflakes.
Although there are thousands of millions of snowflakes right underneath you every second that you're falling down the hill.
Right.
But you don't think about those snowflakes. You're coasting along the surface of that, with accepting that as almost just the nature of the activity.
I think there are a lot of analogies that come to mind, and I think it's good to consider them all provisional, sort of perhaps personally helpful, but provisional, because if we, I think I'm thinking. I wouldn't personally use that analogy, but it might be actually, I can't say that it wouldn't be sort of provisionally helpful at a personal level. So I think, but it's good for us not to bet all our chips on a really clever analogy.
Of course not. By nature of it being an analogy, it's imperfect.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Every analogy is conceptual,
Yeah.
and what the unthing is unthing experience. And indescribable, which all the Dzogchen and the Mahamudra text talk about. I mean, they all say we can't talk about it now. They talk about it in a book that thick.
400 pages later.
Yeah, but that's because we're conceptual beings. But the experience is beyond description, beyond concept, beyond permanent, impermanent, beyond all that, which is good to know. Good to even have those words of unbounded, you know, innate, clear light of mind, fundamental. You know, it's good to have those words, but then I like Bill's word, they're provisional. Yeah, in the experience, those won't do anything. They might get in the way. I love that saying by was it Bokar Rinpoche that said how is it, the concepts will get you toward it, and then they will pull you away from it. So, and we have to find where that place is. I don't remember the exact quote, maybe one of you do. But that was the idea, that, you know, they'll help you get toward it, and then we get very involved with them, and in that, they will take you away.
Well, I think you said something about Mahamudra being so close we can't see it, or
Yeah,
something like that.
There's 4 little things.
There's
about
different
that.
sayings like that.
Yeah,
That
so
one
close.
of those things is that it's so close we can't see it, right?
Yeah, and so simple that we don't believe it. Lama Michael's always saying, you've experienced it many times in a flash. And I say, I haven't. And he says, yes, you have. And I'm like, rah, you know. And then he'll say, I think there's 4 of those, and I can't remember them, but so close that we can't see it, so simple we don't believe it. I don't know, there's a couple others.
So then there are 2 that seem quite close together, though when I read actual, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's the goodness, and it's not that it's so good we can't believe it, but we actually don't see the goodness. We can't imagine it, and that's part of why we don't actually. We can't imagine anything to be that good or that positive.
Yeah.
And profound, but
So profound.
yeah.
And that's all talking about the true nature of things. We just really don't get that we have Buddha nature. We are Buddha nature. We don't have it. That would be like there's a being and it's a thing that the being has. No, we are it. I can say that word. I don't.
Isn't there an aspiration, a section of the aspiration of Mahamudra that talks about that?
Yeah, I don't remember that. Do you know the line? Are you memorizing something?
No, I didn't memorize it at all.
Bill has.
I just remember going through the recitation and sort of like seeing it, Buddha isn't anywhere else or something like that.
Yeah,
Something like that.
yeah. There's all kind of lines in that aspiration for Mahamudra. It's a wonderful thing to meditate on.
Mm-hmm.
You can read one line and just carry that around for a day, because it just the thing I love about that aspiration prayer is it flip-flops you so that you do get little flashes, because it's like, huh?
Yeah,
Huh?
You can't get it all as you're reading it, so you just
Yeah.
have to kind of like let it be and just say
It's
it and see what happens.
jujitsuing your mind on purpose. I think that's what it's set up to do, is to jujitsu you. Like you think, because of the first part of the sentence, you think it's going this way, and it goes flip, and you go, whoa. And then the next one comes. You're just getting flipped around. Very, very amazing prayer, which we say every other first Sunday when we do
really?
Chenrezig with Lama Michael. The all-day Chenrezig at the end,
yeah.
we do the aspiration prayer. Every Sunday. Oh yeah, with Shamatha too. Every first Sunday of the month, when it's an all-day sit, the very last thing we all recite out loud together is that aspiration prayer.
I should start attending those this summer.
Yeah. And is that prayer online? Is it?
It's on the site.
It is. It's sort of hard to find.
It's buried in there.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, just Google it. Google the aspiration for Mahamudra. Yeah.
The best way to search the KCC site is to Google KCC
Oh,
and the content of this.
oh, Google. Please do that, because people ask and I don't.
The best way to navigate the KCC site is to Google KCC and then the subheading of the
Aspiration
part.
prayer.
Whatever it is that you're looking
Yeah, right. So one example is teacher's schedule. You would have to go through like different parts of the website in order to get there, and it takes 10 times as long as just Googling KCC teacher schedule.
And in this case, you would
So-
Google KCC aspiration for
Yeah,
Mahamudra.
and it'll come right up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Thank
Yeah.
you. I just learned something really important.
So which one is it? Is it, it doesn't exist? It doesn't exist, even Buddhas do not see it. Is it that one?
It doesn't not exist.
It does not exist. It is the origin of samsara and nirvana. No contradictions, conjunction, the middle way. May I realize the pure being of mind, free of extremes.
I'm
The part where Buddha isn't anywhere else.
Okay.
Yeah, seeing it Buddha isn't anywhere
Not
else.
realizing it, one circles in the ocean of samsara. Realizing it, Buddha isn't anywhere else.
There you go.
Mm.
It is everything, it isn't anything. None of this.
Mhm.
Pure being, the basis of everything. May I see any misunderstanding here?
I always thought it should be like,
It should be. Ryan's got
I always
it right.
argue with that part of it in my
You
mind
have
when
to
I
argue with
re-
Patro
recite it.
Rinpoche.
No, this is
When I
one of the
recite it,
Karmapas.
I always
Oh,
think
Karmapa.
seeing it, you are Buddha, versus seeing it, Buddha isn't anywhere else, because it's still talking about Buddha being outside of yourself or something. But
Not realizing it, Buddha isn't anywhere else. Isn't anywhere other than in the seeing of, in the realizing of it.
Yeah, this isn't Patro Rinpoche, it's Ramjung Dorje. No,
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's one of the
they're
karmapas,
karmas.
isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
Well, I always thought of it as like the whole. I always thought of it as the line Buddha isn't anywhere else, as it's already like Buddha nature isn't something to be cultivated. It isn't something that like
Yeah.
It's already
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
in each individual conventional sentient being.
and yet there are things to do.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's
because we get confused as though it's something we have to go after. We don't, but we have things in the way of realizing it.
well, and that's interesting because
That's the different
I've
focus.
also become very fond of the sort of the idea that there's nothing to get rid of. So if there's obstacles, if there's obstacles to get rid of, but there's also nothing to get rid of, what are we doing?
Well, I think that's a reference to the fact that nothing is solid.
Mhm.
You know, the kleshas, if we start believing they're solid and real and we got
Literal.
to get rid of them, now we've created a monster.
It's sort of like
One circles in the ocean of samsara.
sort of putting the Atman, putting the essential intrinsic self into those concepts in the same way that we put it into ourselves.
Yeah, and thinking those things are real. My anger's real. My desire, my loneliness, my confusion, it's all real, solid, very, very difficult to get rid of. Maybe can't even.
And that's
I'm in the ocean of samsara now.
and that's the obstacle.
And I believe in the ocean.
It's not the actual. It's not the experiences themselves that we get rid of. It's just the attachment to them being some kind of essential, like thing that
Yeah.
that is its own thing apart from anything from other stuff.
Well, it's so contradictory, you know. I think like the three of us in the practices we started out, you're going to do 111,111 prostrations with a refuge prayer. Is that doing something or not doing something? And if you don't have to do anything, why are we doing this? Which is a question that you continue to wonder as you do these. And it's just so fascinating, this contradiction of nothing to do, but a lot to do. I find it still just fascinating, you know.
I think it's easy to make way too much out of the nothing to do. The nothing to do is really at that level of so close you can't see it. And until we have settled and developed an ability to actually see directly, then there's an awful lot. Then the entire path is basically preparation to allow us to get to a point where that seeing can transpire. And at that point, then, you could say, you don't have to get rid of the kleshas. And you would actually better not try to either get rid of anything or cultivate anything at that point. But when confusion dawns as wisdom, it's not like you're just going on with your business, indulging in the kleshas. It actually, it's gone.
The relationship changes.
The momentum that is always there with the kleshas, when you don't realize their nature, that momentum dissolves.
That's a
then
very high
then
level.
what's that?
Yeah, I was gonna
Very
say,
high
wow.
level.
Yeah, but it's so it's not so useful to make too much out of it.
Yeah.
It's certainly not
don't-
useful to make a kind of a philosophical style out of, well, I don't
Yeah.
get rid of my collages
Don't
because I read this
don't make
someplace.
much to do about nothing.
Yeah.
And rather do the practices that
Yeah.
lead to the state. This is what another tension in the West as Buddhism comes here. We, in part, because of being well educated in philosophy and all kinds of things, we love to talk about emptiness and
We love ideas.
what does that mean and the philosophy and such, but we don't sit every day in our homes. We don't even practice loving kindness towards the folks around us. You know, we're not doing the basics, you know, not consistently. We are trying, and we need to really encourage ourselves for the part we can. But there's this confusion around, we want to jump to the emptiness because it's fascinating. I find it fascinating. I read a lot about it. And then I say, so Zopa, okay, put the book down. You need to do your practices.
I've actually had to stop. I've actually gotten to a point where I kind of reading about emptiness is always counterproductive.
Yeah, well, so you see that now.
I think at a point it's definitely true.
Yeah, and you see that now.
Yeah.
You see you've read enough of those books.
Mhm.
Well,
Yes.
I read so much early on that kind of
Yeah.
that I got really conceptual about all of it and got really fascinated and attached to emptiness as an idea. And
Yeah.
I need to wait until I've reached a point where I can approach it without all of that
That's
baggage.
really good to see that. Yeah.
Because emptiness at this point doesn't really do me much good practically.
Yeah.
The ideas about it, it's got a very sort of limited value, and the more we think about it, the more we can develop all kinds of things. The actual practices to cultivate it are much less dangerous because we can't just kind of flip to the end of the book. It's like you can't. It's like you would say, well, I would like to run a marathon, but I don't get off the couch much. So what are you going to do? You're going to kind of start by walking around the block, once a day, and then you'll build up from there. And when you're walking around the block, there's actually no chance. You don't have the opportunity to just go out and run 26 miles.
Because you're walking.
You're walking. You're doing what you're doing then. And so it unfolds very naturally if we just stick with developing our insight based on the method. It only really becomes highly. There's still some pitfalls along the way if we become attached, but it's much easier to have very elaborate mental castles about things if we
Yes.
just study. And we need to have a lot of guidance
And that's
a lot
why
of the
the-
cautions that you often bring up about it.
The three wisdoms mean we have to do all three.
Can't just do
So
one.
we hear, like this, study a little bit. Contemplate is really important. Like we can do the contemplations that exist in the middle turning of deconstructing the self. What am I made up of? Doing those over and over. Those are conceptual contemplations. But right now, everybody's got a skeleton inside of them. Do you ever think about your skeleton? Your bones? No, because that doesn't have nothing to do with my eye. But really deconstructing all the parts, that's a good contemplation. But then, and then we need to do the meditation of watching the mind, getting to know it, So we can do all three of those, and we need to. But I think we can get some of us are very drawn to the study part. That would be me.
Same.
And that's fine. It's a doorway in then, but you have to then see where the limits are, because you can study and study and study and
But
study.
it's not gonna get you a taste of it.
Some don't know how to contemplate, don't even have a clue. And so they meditate, but they don't have a way to use the contemplation that of the insights that occur, you know. So that's why they say the three wisdoms. And it's good for us to check ourselves out in our practice and get familiar with, you know, do I get stuck on one of these? Do I need a little more study? Some people don't have a blueprint at all. Like what I talked about in my opening remarks, there is a Buddhist worldview, you know, and it includes rebirth and beginningless time and endless time and impermanence, and it would be good to study a little bit about those, you know, or the four immeasurables, the four thoughts, at least be able to say them, the six perfections. Be really good to have those like right here, so I know those are what I'm basing on. But we don't have to, you know, read 20 books on them.
I'll recite about the three wisdoms,
Okay,
since we're on
please
that.
do.
This is also,
aspiration
yeah, from
prayer.
the aspiration prayer. The study of scriptures frees one from the veil of ignorance. The contemplation of oral instructions overcomes the darkness of doubt. Light born of meditation illuminates the way things are. May the radiance of the three wisdoms increase.
Yeah. Thank you.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you. Have a good week. Yeah.
This one has your name on it.
Oh, yeah. That's because I gave Sally and Jeff. God, I love these magazines. They're totally out of print now. The 20. Huh?
You can get them online.
Oh, you can still?
Print them out.
The old ones?
Yeah.
I gave them this on the 20 emptiness